Today on Inside Utah Politics, we continue to dig into the race to lead Utah's capital city. A crowded field has lined up to take over as mayor of Salt Lake City. 3 more candidates are here this week to explain why they want the job.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Good Sunday morning, and thanks so much for joining us for Inside Utah Politics. I'm Glenn Mills. There's an open seat for mayor in Salt Lake City, and it's drawing a lot of interest. 8 candidates are in the running. Here's a look at the list in no particular order. Luz Escamilla, Stan Penfold, David Garnett, Rainer Huck, Aaron Mendenhall, David Ibarra, Jim DeBackus, and Richard Goldberger. This morning, we continue to sit down with the candidates to discuss the big issues. This week, we begin with David Ibarra. David, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Glenn.
You bet. Let's start off with your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've done professionally and in your personal life that you believe has led to this point of being the next mayor of Salt Lake City.
Great. Well, you know, I started off, I was born in Salt Lake, raised in Salt Lake, and some could say Salt Lake is my parent. I grew up in the Utah foster care system from 1 to 14. And that was the first quarter of my life. Second, I had to learn how to make a living. I started as a dishwasher, luckily at a Marriott restaurant, and worked through their system and ended up in 10 years becoming the director of training for the Western United States, and bought my own Farrell's ice cream parlor at Fashion Place Mall and moved back to Salt Lake. Third quarter, I opened up a second business, a third, fourth, fifth, and I've done well in business. I know how to work hard. Nobody outworks me. And during that time period, I started a foundation, put 89 kids through college, coaching folks. And now I'm in the fourth quarter, and I have enough. And I looked at why not give back to the city and bring my skill set of leadership and the development of people to run the city and get some things done. Not a career politician. I know how to lead and get things done, and that's what I want to bring to the city.
What do you see as the biggest challenge over the next 4 years if you were to be elected mayor?
Well, definitely the most, the one that's right in front of us is our homeless situation, and followed by affordable housing, transportation, air quality, and shrinking sales transactions that are a potential decrease in our budget. All of those things are connected and have to be approached in a way that is positive for all of them.
We'll get into some of those issues here in just a minute, but talk about why you believe you're the best fit to be able to tackle those challenges.
I have spent my adult career in fixing things that are broke for businesses, from Marriott to from Honolulu to Kansas City, and invited to speak as far as China to Detroit on fixing things. So I'm in a point in my career that I can do public service, and I know how to problem solve, find core causes, and then the actions to correct the causes, and nothing happens until an action is put into motion. And we've got a whole lot of talk, but we just don't
I wanted to ask
done.
you that. When you say you can fix things that are broken, do you believe the city right now is broken?
I think that when we look at our city, everybody knows how to point out the problems, but we're talking about the same problems. For heaven's sakes, we've been talking about a permitting problem for 30 years. 30 years. And if we look back at the prior debates 4 years ago, 8 years ago, we're still talking about the same problems. We don't seem to get our arms around eliminating a few. Certainly you can't eliminate all of them. They're going to be with us, but we could eliminate some of them, and that's what I intend to do.
So since you bring that up, the permitting problem, what is your solution to that?
Well, I'll tell you what, the permitting process, affordable housing, I know one developer had two projects, 18 months. By the time you get in and do 18 months, you have about a 15% increase in cost, and then you don't have the end result for the individuals needing housing for about 28 months. Permitting can be done in 90 days, and it will be in our administration.
That's a big change from what you're talking about there to 90 days. And you're confident you can do that?
We can get it done in 90 days. Other cities have gotten it done in 90 days. And if you talk to folks around this issue, what prevents it is that the departments don't talk to each other.
Okay.
We have 3 phases. We can do it in 90 days.
All right, let's move on to some important issues and just kind of do a little rapid response here on some of the big things. Of course, Inland Port, a huge issue in the Salt Lake City right now. Do you support the lawsuit that the current mayor has filed for the inland port? Why?
First of all, what a mess. Could be an example of what not to do, but the inland port, as it started, was an investigation on whether or not this would be a good economic move. And then it became a land grab that we either didn't do our part, I don't know what happened, but you can't take 30% of the city and the tax increments that the city would get for 40 years. That makes absolutely no sense. We've got no control. We're not talking about the environment. We can't build the inland port if it's going to have a negative effect. So it would have to be built green, and it would have to create more energy than it burns. We're not talking about any of these issues. We're talking about a lawsuit who has jurisdiction. We have to determine that.
Do you think the mayor should have gone to the table more and tried to negotiate those things with the state?
I think we started off all wrong with our relationships. And I'll tell you one thing that I've learned in my career: you don't get to an agreement by insulting the other parties. You widen your gap, and we approached it wrong, but now we need to start over again if we can. And if we're talking logically about the results, we're going to end up with common sense results.
Immigration. Both the mayor and Salt Lake City Police Department have vowed not to enforce immigration policy. Do you stand by that?
I'm the son of a migrant worker from Oaxaca, Mexico. He came here at 15 to pick fruit. I'm going to stand by that, absolutely. We have got an immigration problem that has been passed to cities and states when our federal government should get it resolved, because we need labor from Mexico, but we need it in the right way. And we've got a mess, and it shouldn't be passed to the city.
Some might say, though, that a mayor, an elected mayor of a city, should be on board with federal policy. Your response to that?
Well, the federal policy should be on board with supplying the cost to handle their own law enforcement, since they segregated it away from local law enforcement to ICE, and then they didn't fund it, and now they want the city to fund it. No.
Okay, let's move on to air quality. Your plan to manage air quality in Utah's capital city.
Well, air quality we've made a lot of progress with Anderson, Becker, and our current mayor. But we've got to finish it. We've got to get to renewable energy by 2030. Now, when we talk about that, that's part of the plan, but affordable housing is the key to improving our air quality.
And how's that?
In that 200,000 people leave the city and come back every day. 40% of them want to live in the city but can't. They have an hour drive, they're idle in time. What that does to our environment, our relationships, and our economic strength in our downtown area, we could solve a lot of things by solving the 80,000 affordable housing gap. It's not 7,500.
Okay. David Ibarra, running for mayor. You can learn more about him, the website on your screen right there, ibarra4mayor.com. I do want to point out that is the numeric 4. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You bet. Stay with us. We will hear from Stan Penfold right after the break. We turn now to former Salt Lake City Councilman Stan Penfold. Stan, welcome to the show. So glad to have you with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Talk about your background. You're running for mayor of Salt Lake City. What is it that you've done in your professional and personal life that you feel sets you apart from really what has become a crowded field?
Well, I started actually as a neighborhood activist years ago when I moved into the city and got involved with an issue in my neighborhood, and sort of immediately went through the neighborhood community council system, became chair of that, and got really engaged in volunteering at the city and being interested in city issues back in the days of Palmer DePaulis. And I got on the city council in 2010, ran a race there, and served 2 very successful terms on the city council where I had a lot of experience. I served 3 of those years as the chair of the redevelopment agency and another 3 years in council leadership. So I think I have some really good experience for how the city works and sort of what makes things happen at the city. My professional background is with the Utah AIDS Foundation. I'm in nonprofits, have been, and I served as the executive director there for 20 years. Just stepped down.
It's funny how something in the neighborhood can catapult you into the political realm. Right?
Absolutely. It's
I've
funny.
been there before.
I know, and I joke sometimes saying I've been on both sides of that pulpit at city council meeting. I've been yelling at elected officials and I've been yelled at by elected officials, and
so you know,
kind of like both sides
circle,
of that.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What do you see as the biggest challenge the capital city is going to face over the next 4 years, and why do you believe you're the person to get through that?
Well, I think there are sort of two big issues. What we hear from people pretty consistently is they're concerned about the air quality and they're just tired of nothing really dramatically changing. So I think we have a big challenge in front of us to really take significant steps to address our air quality. And there's a lot of things I think we can do as a capital city. One of the initiatives that I'm proposing is a free fare for clean air, so we're not charging people for UTA passes if you live in Salt Lake City. It's a program that we tried out on a couple of red air days back in 2017, incredibly successful.
Is that something you'd want to do on poor air quality days?
I'd want to do it year-round. I think it's a year-round program. One of the challenges with just doing it sporadically through the year is the air quality gets bad over time.
Sure.
So we can do it on, I think we'll be seeing some program to do it for clean air, for red air days this winter, but I think it should be year-round.
Yeah, that is something we saw go through the legislature this year.
Right.
For poor air quality
17 days, yes, for poor air quality, yes.
Okay, let's go ahead and hit on some of the big issues facing the city right now, and you respond to those. We'll get through as many as possible.
Sure.
Let's start with the inland port. First off, do you support the lawsuit that the city has filed against it?
I do, because I really believe that the state overstepped its constitutional authority by taking the authority away from Salt Lake City to manage that part of the property within the city limits. I do think that's a constitutional violation. I think we need to clear that up. In the meantime, I think we need to pretty much have kind of a reset. Everybody got off on the wrong foot with the inland port. What we're doing now is not the most successful thing for the state. It's certainly not the most beneficial thing for the residents of Salt Lake City. And I hope to bring people back to the table and say, let's start this again. Get the people who should be there in a conversation and a dialogue and really hammer out what we want to see that benefits all of us.
Current Mayor Jackie Biskupski felt like she wasn't being listened to, so she felt like the best option was to kind of take herself out of the negotiations. Would you have done things differently?
It's hard to, quarterback Monday morning, so I think it's unfortunate we found ourselves in this situation, because I think there are some things that will really benefit the state and some things that really benefit the city with some of the tools that are created through the inland port. But the way it's going right now, I think it's pretty much an environmental disaster, and I think it's an unfortunate situation we find ourselves in. And we need to, everybody take a deep breath, take a step back and say, what are we trying to accomplish and how are we going to get there together?
Okay, let's move on to immigration. Hot topic. The president has been talking about some raids and deporting illegal immigrants. Salt Lake City has taken a stand on that, saying we will not enforce immigration policy. Do you stand behind that?
Absolutely stand behind that. I think it's really unfortunate what's happening on a national level. I was very pleased several years ago when Salt Lake City and Utah did the Utah Compact and took a pretty innovative stand on immigration for the state of Utah. It was in response to some things that were happening in Arizona at the time. And I think we go back to those values that it's never a good idea to separate families, ever.
Is it a good idea for an elected mayor, though, to say publicly, we will not enforce federal policy?
I think there's a responsibility to represent the constituents of the city, and clearly the people of the city don't like what's happening on a federal level, and they think it's inhumane. And so I think that's the foundation for that stance, and I feel really comfortable with that.
Let's talk homelessness.
Yes.
Salt Lake City, this is a statewide problem. However, Salt Lake City finds itself at the epicenter of it. Do you like what you saw out of Operation Rio Grande, and what role should the city play moving forward as these new resource centers open up?
My biggest concern I have with the new centers is that we're seeing a pretty significant reduction in number of beds. We're losing probably 300 to 400 beds when the new centers open up. The centers are good because they focus services in the center, so that's a good thing. I'm very concerned about this winter. We're going to lose about 300 beds. I haven't heard a good plan of where we might house those people if we have a harsh winter or if we have a couple of bad storms.
So what would be a good plan?
I think we might have to look at keeping the road home temporarily open through this winter just to see how things go, because I wouldn't want to shut the services down and then all of a sudden have no place to house people.
Let's talk growth. Our state is growing hugely. The city is growing at a very rapid pace. How do you manage that growth as people come here and we see housing prices just skyrocket and so forth?
Affordability for housing is a statewide issue. The real challenge we're seeing in Salt Lake are super low income people who just can't afford to stay in the city, and also new home buyers. If you're looking for a new home, if you're a young couple, a young professional, and you're doing your first time home buy, you cannot find anything. There's nothing on the market. The city needs to look at those gaps in housing services and work with our local developers and the state to see how can we leverage our resources to make sure that we're getting some inventory built where those gaps are.
We have about 30 seconds left. Tell me your thoughts on transportation. I know that's a lot to talk about in 30 seconds, but summarize it for us.
For me, transit is the priority, and doing a no fare for transit for all Salt Lake City residents is the #1 priority for me, I think, first 100 days. From there, I think it's really critical that we expand transit so that it takes people where they want to go.
Okay, fantastic. You can learn more about Stan at stanformayor.com. We should have that graphic, there we go, right there on the screen for you. Stan, we'll be watching how this pans out as we head into the final weeks. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll check in with David Garnett right after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Welcome back. We conclude our Salt Lake City mayoral candidate discussions this week with David Garnett. David, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Glenn, thanks for having me.
You bet. Let's start off with your background. What have you done in your personal life, your professional life, that you feel has led up to this moment for you to be the next mayor of Salt Lake City?
Grew up in the Salt Lake Valley, and I dreamt of helping my community. It was why I decided to go to law school and come back and work with the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance for 10 years, fighting for our environment. That's why I decided to work with the Pioneer Park Coalition on homelessness and public safety, and that's why I want to run for mayor.
Okay, we'll get into a lot of those issues here in a bit. When you take a look at the next 4 years, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the capital city, and why are you the person to get through that?
Yeah, I think that the biggest issue that the city is facing is air quality, by far. I've been out across this entire city, chatted with voters in all parts, and I consistently hear air quality. We know that it's terrible here, and we know that not only is it making people unhealthy and sick, it's also dragging our economy down. And I think that we need a new generation of leadership to work on this issue, and that's what I represent, and that's why I'm the person to do this. I'm new to politics, but I have built my career on addressing issues like air quality. I've built my career on addressing issues like homelessness and public safety.
Let's stick on air quality for a minute. No doubt it's a threat economically and individually. What is your plan for dealing with it in Salt Lake City?
Yeah, I've actually got a 4-part plan for addressing air quality. One of the key steps that I think we need to take, first and foremost, is to actually put together a plan that quantifies every step that we need to take to get to clean air. We've never had that. So the way we talk about air quality here is so scattershot. We put forward things that we don't know what the end result will be and how much of a difference they will make. What we need to do is lay out for residents, and not just in Salt Lake City, but the entire Salt Lake Valley. Salt Lake City's not an island, but lay out for them a plan to actually get to clean air. It's something I've committed to do in my first year. This is standard practice. When I was a lawyer working on air quality issues, I would see this all over the place, but never saw it in Salt Lake. So that's step one.
So get into that plan, though. What are some specific steps you think you would be able to take?
That plan needs to be informed first and foremost by knowing exactly how much of an impact we get from every step we take. And I think it's more important first to start with quantifying what improvements we need and then developing policies. So for example, once we have that, we'll probably want to look at policies that will address older vehicles on the road. They contribute an outsized share of air pollution. We'll want to look at policies that will help to incentivize better efficiency in homes and buildings because they're a large share of our air pollution. I think that aside from that plan, one of the things I'm talking about is working to move some of our biggest polluters out of the valley, the refinery, for example.
Talk about that, because that's pretty ambitious, and I may be putting that lightly. As far as I know, you can't force them to leave. It could be expensive. So how can you deliver on that campaign promise?
Well, I can't promise that we'll move them, but we should try.
Okay.
Air quality is critical. We know, like I said, we're making people sick. We're dragging down our economy. Political leadership is all about having a vision and working to accomplish that. And it's time that we stop talking about small incremental approaches and talk about the big things that will actually get us to a point where we don't have dirty air in this valley anymore. And I want to be a mayor that leads on that. I want to start by actually visiting with the refineries, understanding what sort of obstacles they face. I want the city to invest in a master plan that re-envisions that area, how it could look after those depart, and go from there.
All right, let's get to some other issues. The inland port, do you support the lawsuit that the city is now engaged in against the state?
Yes, for sure. And again, this is what I did for my career. I was an attorney, fought issues like this. That lawsuit is critical in us defending our airshed, in us defending the role of the city and being able to shape decisions here.
Immigration. Both the current mayor and the Salt Lake City Police Department have said they will not enforce immigration policy. Do you stand by that?
I do. I would not enforce it either. And not only that, I would look to ways that the city could be even more supportive of our families that are here. I mean, it's fundamental. I believe in family values. I think that every family should feel safe here in Salt Lake City. We know that we get better outcomes when our citizens feel engaged with the city. They feel like they can step up and talk to the police, that they can go to school, they can go to their parent-teacher conferences. We can't have that sort of fear, and it's the moral thing to do. I want no part of ripping families apart.
What about some who might say an elected mayor should not be openly saying they will not enforce federal policy? Your response to that?
I have no qualms that, as history looks back on us, that they will say that that was the right decision to stand up for families. There's no question in my mind about that.
Okay, homelessness, big issue in Salt Lake City. It's a state problem, but you really are the epicenter of it in Salt Lake City. Do you support what happened with Operation Rio Grande, and what is the role moving forward from that?
I do. I think that Operation Rio Grande, in addition to making our city safer, helping with the way that we've addressed homelessness here in the city, is also one of the most important things that it did was to put a spotlight on this issue for the rest of the state. Put a spotlight on this issue with the state legislature. Look, Salt Lake City is always going to struggle in responding to homelessness because we are a city of 200,000, yet we are providing the lion's share of homeless services for a state of 3 million, and that's always a stretch for our city. I think we should do it. I don't have a problem with that, but I'd like the state to be helpful. I'd like other communities whose residents we are serving here in Salt Lake to also help us out so that we can better help people get off of the streets and into housing.
Our population is growing big time here in the state of Utah and in Salt Lake City. What's your plan for managing growth as we continue to see our population boom?
Yeah, I've put out, again, another plan on this issue as well, and it involves ensuring that we're providing housing that is deeply affordable for some of these people that might be coming off the streets so that we have options for them, for our families that cannot pay a rent close to market value. Also ensuring that our city is providing housing for young professionals, working families, young families, empty nesters, people that can't afford many of the products that we have now in the city. I also think that there's a key component as it relates to transportation how we plan to grow, and what we're doing with infrastructure.
Okay, we're going to have to end it on that note, but you can learn more about David Garnett at garbett4mayor.com, the web address right there on your screen. Thanks so much for being here today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Glenn.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. Next week on this show, we're going to wrap up the profiles with the candidates for Salt Lake City Mayor. Those 8 candidates will be narrowed down to 2 in the municipal primary. Watch for mail-in ballots to start arriving the week of July 23rd. The election is Tuesday, August 13th. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues that are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Just log on and search Glenn Mills, ABC4. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.